This slideshow accompanies Chapter 14 on digestion and nutrition. And in it, we are going to describe the types of nutrients, say a little bit about them, and then we'll describe some of the parts of the gastrointestinal tract and talk about their function. We'll focus on the main parts. This is really our last section on the structure and function of the human body. And so it's kind of a wrap up and to tie in with some of the other things that we've done. So, first, let's talk about nutrients. Nutrients are substances, chemicals that are in foods that are needed for the structure, the function, and the health of the human body. Some of them go directly into building our tissues. Others are molecules that we need for a source of energy or to regulate our body function. The nutrients in the human body fall into 6 classes by their chemical structure. The carbohydrates, which we need for energy and for roughage. Lipids, again, structure and energy, we use those for. Minerals, which are regulatory and structural molecules. Proteins, again, used for structure, for energy, and some for regulatory. Vitamins are structural and regulatory molecules, and then water. Let's talk in a little more detail about some of these nutrients. 3 of the nutrients are called the macronutrients. You don't need to know the term, it's just classifying them. These are needed in large amounts. We need several, tens or hundreds of grams of them every day. They often supply us energy and are very often structural molecules. The 3 main types of macronutrients, or the 3 types of macronutrients, are carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Carbohydrate molecules are molecules like sugars and starches and indigestible fiber. They show the sugar molecule right there in the center, and that's one of the components of bread, of starch. Lipid molecules are the fats and oil molecules, largely constructed of fatty acids or derivatives of cholesterol. We get them in animal foods and plant foods, and they are an excellent source of energy, and some of them are important structural molecules for our cells. And then lastly, proteins. Proteins are molecules built of amino acids. They're extremely large molecules. They too can be a source of energy, but they're more often used as structural or regulatory molecules. Okay, then the micronutrients are nutrients that are needed in much smaller amounts, and they are regulatory or structural. They never supply us with a source of energy, and these include the minerals and the vitamins, and there's many of them. There's many minerals here. The essential minerals are shown in purple. You don't need to know them or this chart, but examples of essential minerals are things like calcium, magnesium, potassium, iron, cobalt, zinc. There's lots of these, and we use them to do regulatory things. Some are structural, like for building our bones. So there's many of them. Likewise, there's many vitamins. I don't have a picture for that here, but the vitamins are organic molecules, so they contain carbon, hydrogen, and often oxygen. And these are molecules we can't make in our own body that have to be in our food, and they're almost all regulatory. We need them to run certain events or certain chemical reactions. So these nutrients, both the macronutrients and the micronutrients, are the things we need out of food. And foods are complex mixtures of nutrients. Some of these are very abundant, some are kind of rare, some are found in a wide variety of foods, some only in a few foods. In general, whole foods, whole, raw, or minimally processed foods have lots of nutrients, and the processed and stored foods have less nutrients. We generally divide foods into groups, and those groups often share lots of characteristics. They're not identical. So the grains includes things like breads, pasta, starch-rich foods that contain lots of carbohydrates, but relatively low amounts of proteins and lipids. Fruits, and to a lesser extent vegetables, contain lots of carbohydrates, but they also contain lots of the micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals that we need that we often don't find in grain products. Grains make up the bulk of our diet, but fruits and vegetables should be a large part too. Protein foods include meats, nuts, legumes, things like that, eggs. They're foods that contain lots of proteins. Often they contain lots of lipids, as well as a different set of vitamins and minerals. And then lastly, dairy products. And this dairy products include things like milk, yogurts, cheeses, and things like that. Again, contain a kind of a special set of minerals, calcium, lots of vitamin D, and so are important for us. So, foods are these complex mixtures. Nutrients are really what we need from foods. We eat foods to get at the nutrients, and that means that when we eat the food, we really have to process the food a bit before we get what we need. And the digestive system is really processes food so that we get the nutrients out of it. Our digestive system, the main part of it is called the gastrointestinal tract, and that's a long tube with specialized regions. This tube is really made up of 4 different tissues, 4 layers of tissue. These layers are listed as the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis, and the serosa. The inner part of the tube is the lumen, and food winds up in the lumen, and that's the space inside the tube. And then the mucosa interacts with the food. It secretes materials to help chemically digest the food, and then it absorbs it. And the other layers support the functions of the mucosa and assist in several processes. Our digestive tract has to mechanically process food. That means breaking it up, dissolving food particles into water, transporting it, mixing it with digestive secretions. This is all part of the mechanical processing or mechanical digestion of food. And I've already mentioned it, but our digestive tract secretes tons and tons, I shouldn't say tons, gallons of liquid each day to help us digest and absorb our food. We produce several gallons of fluid, of digestive fluids, including saliva, stomach fluids, fluid from our liver and pancreas and small intestines. These fluids are needed to process foods, to add the things in that will help chemically digest the food, and then to make the food so that it can be easily transported and moved. And so we secrete lots of materials into food. And then we use to digest the food, the actual physical chemical digestion requires the use of enzymes and bile to break up the molecules into small enough parts that they can be absorbed into the body. And that absorption means those food molecules have to cross the mucosa and enter blood vessels in the submucosa or lymph vessels in the submucosa so they can be transported to our body. Then the last thing is food doesn't contain, not all of food is things we want to enter our body. And so part of the job of the digestive system is to allow us to absorb the things we need and to eliminate the waste products, the parts of food we can't digest, the parts of food we don't want, and a few things that are secreted into this digestive tract because we don't need them. So our digestive tract begins with the mouth and the mechanical processing of food that happens with the teeth and the gums and the cheeks and the tongue. And the salivary glands are going to secrete fluid into that to help dissolve foods and to begin the process of breaking up some of the chemicals in food. Food that is sufficiently moistened and ground up in the oral cavity goes down the esophagus, and the muscles of the esophagus push it into the stomach. And the stomach is really the first large chamber of the digestive tract, and it's the first chamber that does a lot of chemical digestion. The stomach secretes gastric fluids, and these include mucus, which protects the lining of the stomach. The stomach secretes strong acid. It's a hydrochloric acid. It's HCl there. That hydrochloric acid will begin the breakdown of proteins, and it kills microorganisms in food. There's a strong enzyme that again helps digest protein, pepsin. And then the stomach mixes all the food molecules that enter with this gastric secretions. And so the stomach is very muscular. It has circular, longitudinal, and oblique layers, and it does lots of mixing. Once the food is thoroughly mixed with the secretions of the stomach, it is called chyme, and it's a liquid then. And that liquid has some broken down proteins, and some of the other molecules like water and simple sugars can be absorbed through the stomach, but most digestion is yet to occur, and most absorption occurs. And the most important part of the intestine for digestion and absorption, or the gastrointestinal tract, is the small intestine. The small intestine is a thin tube that begins at the stomach with a part called the duodenum, and then it goes through several folds and receives secretions from the pancreas, which produces really powerful enzymes like amylase, lipase, and protease. And it receives secretions from the gallbladder, which stores bile made in the liver, and that helps break up fatty material so that it can be digested and absorbed. And so most digestion is completed in this small intestine. So large molecules like lipids are broken up into their components, glycerol and fatty acids. Starches are broken up into sugars. Proteins are broken up into amino acids. And these things are absorbed through the mucosa in the small intestine, and they'll enter the bloodstream and then be transported throughout the body. Okay. Most digestion and most absorption occurs in the small intestine. Okay. What remains after digestion in the small intestine enters the large intestine, or colon. And this is a shorter but wider in diameter stretch of the gastrointestinal tract. Not much digestion occurs here. In fact, part of this area, the appendix, houses lots of bacteria, and the whole colon has lots of bacteria, and these organisms work on the materials that we can't digest, and they produce some vitamins, so they do some useful things for us. But mostly what the large intestine does is it reabsorbs water and allows us to eliminate wastes. And by eliminating waste, then we move the materials that we don't want in our body out. And we do that usually 1 to maybe 2 or 3 times per day. Okay, so that's our introduction to the digestive system and nutrients. Nutrients are the chemicals we need from food. The major ones are carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. We need those in large amounts. And in smaller amounts, we need the minerals and the vitamins. The digestive system is primarily made up of a long tube, the gastrointestinal tract. And this mechanically processes food. It secretes materials for digestion, and then it absorbs and eliminates materials from the digestive tract. The 3 areas where the primary amount of digestion and absorption occur are the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. Okay, we'll stop there.